I'm a big fan of zombie movies since the Romeros of the 70s and 80s to the more elaborate ones like Zombieland and so on. And I couldn't help myself from noticing when I go around the cities, and I'm sure people who listen to us have the same feeling. You go around and you see people numbed by their jobs, connected all the time through their smartphones, texting each other, but not actually meeting each other
Yeah.
in real life, and basically going through life alienated, just as actually Karl Marx predicted they would be 150 years ago. And when I look at that, I can just see them as the zombies of the movies. Actually, I should put myself into that because who am I to judge? But really, we have become the zombies of the movies, just as is that in that very good, people have seen this British zombie movie, Shaun of the Dead, where at the beginning you see people in public transports, people in the queuing and working in the supermarkets, Walmart's employees just going around and having a completely alienated life, which is not so different from a zombie, undead or a living dead, which is a very sad conclusion to millions of years of evolution of the human species.
Part of human evolution is that we are a social species. We're evolved to be in small groups, in gangs, in tribes, and all this. And this zombie state of being that people have, and this disconnectedness that technology creates, it basically separates us to the way we're connected to a central hub, but we're not connected to our neighbors. And so we have no real social grounding in modernity. And I think that's why the people are so zoned out. They're not connected to anybody near them. And unfortunately, the reason why, what this does is it makes everybody much easier to control.
Yeah, just to interject, one fascinating thing about America, and you see less of this in Europe, is the development of suburbs. And in these kind of suburbs, it's very different than being in, say, a small town, or being just outside of town. It's something different. In a way, you don't know your neighbors, and you exist with the things that define your life are your car, driving to work, watching television, and being in your home. It's a deeply atomized existence, and it seems to be getting much worse, much worse than even when I was a kid.
And I must tell you, it is the same in Europe everywhere. This is a basically, and what you have to see about the human being is that whether it's food, social relations, we tend to go to the easy path. We crave sugar, we crave bread because it's a cheap calorie.
Yeah.
But in 50,000 years ago and before that, these things were impossible or very hard to get, and that's why we crave them. Imagine, on a can of soda, you have sugar that is equivalent to about 3 meters. What's 3 meters in? That's 9 feet, a bit more than
something like that.
9 feet of cane sugar. Now, there's no way any one of our ancestors would have chewed in a day 9 feet of cane sugar. We had each a Coke, and that's that's a 33-ounce Coke in a few seconds, right? And I know people who drink 10 of that every day.
Yeah.
And it's the same with relationships. It's so easy to have this impersonal Facebook relationship. It's so easy to have virtual friends. It's so easy to ignore your neighbors and not to do the effort to build the bonds, the relationships that make us who we are. Indeed, we are a tribal animal. We need the alphas, we need the omegas, we need the pack to feel alive. And actually, I would say that if each of you remembers your best memories in life, besides sex, let's put that aside. The best memories in life are probably when you were young and when you were with your gang, whether it was in the army with your unit,
Yes.
whether it was in some business, especially when you're young, when you're in your first company, you are all motivated before they destroy that motivation, of course. But usually our best memories are when we were a kin man or kin woman, depends. And that is because that's how we are wired in our, we have three brains, and all of these three brains, the reptilian, the neocortex, and so on, connect with, are made us to feel good but yet society pushes us to the easy path, and the easy path is to be lazy. The easy path is to have immediate gratification, to have a cheap calorie, and eventually it will, and it is destroying us.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're in a way getting away from a lot of the mammalian aspects. The mammalian brain is the center of emotion. It's the center of social bonding, and it's also the center of what you could call like nonverbal communication. The way you can indicate to someone that you like them or you don't like them or you don't want to talk to them. And I think we're almost getting away from that. We're being stripped from those real natural social relations, and in this maybe ironic way, we might even be becoming reptiles again. I was thinking, because again, there are three brain centers, as Piero pointed out, and I've always thought this is an amazing kind of metaphor for a lot of things. But there's the reptilian brain stem, which is basically fight, fuck, kill, eat, kind of thing. Very basic emotions. And those are kind of emotions that don't have any social connection in a way. You might want to eat your sister or kind of thing. You don't have any sense of the social bond. And then, the mammalian brain system grew out over that, and it's a kind of later development. And it's in a way, what makes us human, so to speak, where we have emotions, we have sense of bonding with people and sometimes even animals. We have this kind of thing, this social, that sixth sense, so you can nonverbal communication. And then there's this last thing that came very late in evolutionary history, and that is the frontal lobe, where the center of rationality. And I guess what's kind of interesting about this is that the reptilian brainstem, or even the spinal cord or something like that, is extremely old and it's extremely efficient. And so your reptilian and your mammalian systems are making decisions, and it's kind of the job of the frontal lobe to rationalize them or give justifications for them. But the frontal lobe is very inefficient, and the reptilian brain is very efficient. But anyway, let me just mention this one thing, just to add another kind of anecdote about who we are in modern society, and it is this Black Friday phenomenon, which it got started in the United States, and I've actually heard it's migrating to Europe. And and Black Friday is, of course, the Friday after the Thanksgiving holiday, and it's when there are lots of sales at big box stores, and people go and get Christmas presents and things like this. And one of the, you can look at this on one level as saying these people are hyper modern and they're hyper consumerist, and all they care about is material wealth and money and so on and so forth. But, in this other way, they're almost being turned into animals. You don't need to punch the person right next to you. There are plenty of VCRs to be bought, but we have this almost sense, we're almost returned to this world of scarcity, even in a world of ridiculous abundance, like a Walmart. And so I think this kind of gets at this this metaphor that I think informs this whole podcast, which is this, who we are as advanced primates, as men, is very different than this civilized postmodern world we live in. And there's some real consequences to this. There's some really painful divergences, and this is maybe kind of what this almost kind of defines social tension and some psychological problems we have. But anyway, Jack, you wrote a book on who we are as men. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and maybe how some of those ancient ways of men are being lost or twisted in the postmodern world?
Well, I think socially, I think men are more disconnected than anyone. in our society. Because, and I think I wrote something about this recently in an interview I did for a Finnish publication, Sarastus, and men, because the only thing that they're really allowed to focus on is family. That's really the only outlet given to them by our society. Because real groups of men are no longer allowed. You don't have like fraternities in the way that you used to have them. You have them in college, but then not really in the rest of life.
Yeah.
All the major men's groups have been integrated with women. There is no men's world that men go to because women are in that world. So, men used to leave the house, and everybody likes to talk about Mad Men, the Don Draper world, where men go out into the world of men and make money and do that. But it's like hunting. But men don't have that anymore. They don't have any connection to men, and so they really only have their family. And so I think that's a loss that's been having, because men are kind of ruled by the women in their lives, and they really don't have a sense of their own identity, because their masculine identity has to do with who they are in the context of groups of men. And so I think it makes them very I don't think they know themselves in the same way that they would otherwise. And I think it makes them nervous creatures.
And also, you might want to talk a little bit about this phenomenon that some people have begun to notice, and they've called it the man-child phenomenon, or the men, and they use that obviously as a way of insulting men.
Right.
Or men are withdrawing, and I think what's happening with a lot of men is that they see that they often get the short end of the stick with marriage, where if there's any divorce, they're just going to simply be working the rest of their lives for women. This culture does not value them. A lot of corporate America does not value them. And they just kind of don't want to be beta providers. They don't see this as a good deal. They don't see a bright future in it. And so they kind of withdraw into their cave, so to speak, of maybe just being single, of maybe they withdraw into a cave of the internet, or of gaming, or of porn, or something like that. And obviously, I don't think anyone sees this as an ideal situation, but as opposed to calling them man-children or saying, oh, they're so immature, what's wrong with men? Why is this done? I think in a way we have to see this as their kind of natural response to the fact that they're being deracinated.
Well, absolutely. I mean, why would they continue to invest in a society that doesn't reward them? That's what you do with an investment. You seek reward. You seek return. Not to reduce things to money, but I mean, if you look at any even social interaction, I mean, if you're not getting anything back, why do you give anything? If no one ever compliments you, why do you keep complimenting people? I mean, why? You just end up feeling used.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way American men feel in many cases. They just feel, that they're being used. And you see the anger. I mean, when we talk about the media and the discussions that are happening in the media, I mean, we're talking mostly about women. And the people who are calling men man-children are generally women, because the men aren't doing what women want them to do. They're shaming them into like, you're children because you are not helping me with my mortgage. I need to have my Barbie dream house, and I can't get it unless I have a second income. So, I think that's what's happening. So, so you're seeing this frustration, especially with these well-to-do women who are writing for these magazines like The Atlantic and the New York Times and so forth. And you see that they're frustrated with their dating options and with these men who are withdrawing. But yes, as you said, it's a natural response. They're not getting they can get whatever they want from women in terms of, as many have said, that, the sexually liberated woman is easy pickings to some degree. I mean, they don't really have to work for the sex.
Yeah.
And so they get the sex, and why would they make the rest of the commitment when it's just a downward spiral of debt and obligation?
Yeah.
Exactly. And actually, if I may add to that, not to do the devil's advocate, because I clearly agree, but certainly it's not a good bargain either for the woman. Women are ending up alone.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
And the world is extremely cruel on women. If you look on the financial, even the financial status of women who end up being alone or with a child and left alone, because often you do find women who try to go through life juggling with both a career and family life and through a divorce. And yes, maybe sometimes the man end up paying, but often the man just leaves.
Yeah.
And often there's no money for the woman either. And I actually think, in fact, my third book, which comes out in March, is going to talk about why women are going to suffer much more from the economic collapses than men in reality if they're not careful. Because when the reality of nature comes back, woman is in trouble, unfortunately. And the reality is because when physical strength is going to be needed again, because clearly not every man around is going to be a nice guy and protective, and a lot of men are going to turn to predators. In the old days, 2 centuries ago, in the 18th century, London, Dublin, Naples, I've studied that, 50% of the women living in those cities were prostitutes. There was no other way for single women to survive.
Huh.
Now, 50%, half. So you can imagine all the kids that were born without fathers and abandoned in orphanages, if they were lucky, or even if they were more lucky, they would end up into the British Navy or as child prostitutes as well. This was a very, very difficult time. And in fact, what is sad is that today's world, as you described correctly, postmodern, was built on the promise of progress.
Yeah.
And an ideology of progress. And up to some point, progress was actually cool. I mean, it brings material advantages, but it also brings more freedoms, more liberty. And instead of having been collectively responsible of these freedoms and these technological advantages, we have been on one hand, we have been plunging ourselves into self-gratification, self-congratulation, and perhaps even techno-narcissism, but also been manipulated by people who are very smart, people who understand propaganda, who understand marketing, who understand human collective psychology and social engineering, to turn us collectively into this consumerist nothingness, which eventually is unpleasant, unfulfilling, it's saddening. And all of this is actually consuming if it was just an experiment somewhere in the jungle where there is no consequence to our future generations, well, it would be a civilization that disappears, and that's it. But unfortunately, we are consuming the world's natural resources by doing this. I mean, all these Black Fridays are in reality a huge quantity of energy, a huge quantity of natural resources, a huge quantity of stuff and energy that is disappearing forever. So not only are we stupidly destroying the world for our own little iPhones and plasma TV screens, but we're also killing our children. And I mean literally. Which is sad.
Yeah, without question. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I think in terms of, just to maybe finish up on the women's situation, and I've lived in places like New York City, I've lived in Chicago, I've lived in other cities as well, and I don't say this as some kind of macho talk or anything like that. But in a way, 50% of women are still prostitutes today in these big cities.
Well, they're certainly
And
well prepared for it.
yeah, and right. Well, it won't be that different after the collapse, because in a way, buying them, spending $75 on dinner and some drinks and so on and so forth will get you laid, more or less.
Right.
It's obviously it's not literally prostitution, but it in a way is something like it. And I think also just these, and in some ways we're almost repeating history. A lot of these big cities are just graveyards for young women. I mean, I remember being on this subway train where there were I was it was in New York City, and it was when the person I was with. We were some of the very few white people on the train, and there was this big black guy with like literally a chain around his neck, and then there was a woman in a burqa, and it was just this weird cantina scene from Star Wars, that we were experiencing. And then there were these very
Today's
cute.
world.
Yeah.
Today's world everywhere.
So we live in the cantina scene from Star Wars.
Yes.
But also there were some of these very cute girls, like very, very attractive, most likely highly intelligent. And they were kind of like sitting there on their cell phones. I remember just looking at them. There's this kind of poignant moment for me, and I was just thinking, these girls are they're very attractive. They've got so much going for them, and they're gonna wake up at age 45 in an apartment alone, surrounded by cats.
Yeah.
And it's just really profoundly sad.
Yeah,
right.
Or maybe something worse. And I guess maybe we should dive into a lot of the idea of what Piero has written about in his book, which we've just translated and things like that. But the end of the postmodern world. I mean, do you talk a little bit about this, Piero? I mean, do you almost see this ending? We're almost seeing the first. We're seeing the prelude of the end of the postmodern world, just today, or in.
Yeah, I believe we are seeing the end of the religion of progress.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, it links very much with what Jack is writing. We are nearing an end of, and I always joke saying it's not the end of the world, but it's the end of our world, because that's the world we know.
Yeah.
And certainly for the Maasai tribe in Kenya, this is not going to change anything. Mm-hmm. But for us, living in big cities across the West, and not only the West, but also the Middle East and Eastern world, all these big cities, from New York to Dubai to Beijing to Mumbai, the modern world built on technology, built on fossil fuels, has enabled such a luxury of goods, of material products that make our lives the ones of kings. And even more than kings, we are like gods today. We are heated in winter, we are cooled in the summer, we can travel across the world. I mean, no king 1,000 years ago, or even 500 years ago, could in 12 hours fly to South Africa for the summer, or fly to Latin America, or visit China on a click on the internet to buy its plane tickets. I mean, our life is just amazing. And yet, we are almost 8 billion people today. The growth of population is exponential, and it's still growing. And we are reaching the point, and in fact, in some cases, we have passed the point of depletion of natural resources. And we have certainly passed conventional peak oil. We probably will soon pass unconventional peak oil as well. Mm-hmm. We are going to have the physical impossibility to continue with this world. And if you add to that the pollution, the destruction of the environment across the world, and of course the financial debacle in which we're living, where we're actually continuing to live on borrowed money which is printed again with no collateral, and in fact is worth nothing. The result here is a perfect storm that is coming. Now, is it coming in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years? It's hard to say. Certainly, my scenario in my book is towards this decade.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the question that is interesting in what you just discussed about men and women is that the more a society is strong and resilient, the more it can cope with crises. So take an example of the tsunami in Japan 2 years ago. When you have some massive destruction.
Yeah.
Well, the Japanese have a culture of being resilient, of being helping each other, of not panicking and not looting. Well, there was a few dozens of thousands of dead, and they just very well reconstructed immediately. They helped each other immediately, and that's because it's the national character. They are strong. Take as an example, I don't know, of course, Hurricane Katrina, 2005 in New Orleans. I mean, before even the hurricane hit the city, they were starting to have lootings and people shooting each other and rapes and this is just one example of the way we are not resilient anymore and we're not strong. And if you add to this the fact that we don't care about each other, that we're foreigners to each other, even on the same building, on the same house, even in the same family, we don't know each other and we don't care about each other anymore. In fact, I call what is going to happen the collapse, the economic collapse. But in reality, the economy is the only thing that is left to collapse. Right. Everything has already collapsed. Our social fabric, our morals, our integrity, our social bonds, everything has already collapsed. And we are living in a world that is a house of cards, and the little pinprick that is going to make it all collapse could be a war in the Middle East. It could be an oil shock. It could be a financial bubble bursting. It could be so many things that, unfortunately, we are incredibly fragile.
Yes.
And I believe that my theory is that we are going to react like morons. Instead of reacting with strength and reacting with, exactly, we are going to react with apathy. And I'm not the only one thinking that. I mean, people like James Howard Kunstler and other writers have theorized that we are going to probably react extremely bad and end up suffering. And in some cases, it will be death and destruction. And I don't want to sound dramatic, but the reality is that in any biological system, when you go beyond the capacity of the system in terms of national resources, of natural resources, eventually when the system passes that point, it collapses extremely quickly with extremely high prejudice for the people. And the quantity, the number of people becomes the variable of adjustment. And it happened before many, many times in the human history. And it's going to happen again. So unfortunately, because we have to say, I mean, I understand some people who rejoice about that, but when you look at the size of the collapse that we're going to face, it's very hard to rejoice. And I always say, well, actually, there are good things in today's world. There are good things in our civilization that our grandfathers have built. Mm-hmm. However, we have not been good handlers of that heritage. And perhaps we have to suffer to rediscover our true nature. And indeed, it is one of gangs of men bonding together, of the tribe, of the clan. And you know what? Remember, the nation was a big tribe.
Yeah. Right.
And that has been destroyed in postmodernism. So we'll have to rediscover from the roots, from the ground up. And that's where Jack's writing and mine actually have a strong, I think, connection here. Because we are touching some fundamentals of human nature, I think.
Actually, Jack, why don't you take a kind of thought experiment? Because, as Piero would admit, I mean, it's impossible for us to really predict the collapse. You don't know what will happen. Maybe there's some miraculous thing will delay this for decades. Who knows?
Fusion.
Yeah, right. I mean, it could happen, or I don't know. But why don't you, without predicting anything, why don't you just kind of take a thought experiment? I mean, what do you think would happen to postmodern America if the carpet were kind of ripped from under its feet?
Well, as you and I talked about before the podcast started, it's there's due to weather alone. There's a little mini apocalypse that is happening all around the country because America's had such harsh weather this winter. And I mean, there are places that are prepared for it and places that aren't. And I happen to live in a place that isn't prepared for snow. We have snow in Portland once a year, maybe. No one had no one's prepared for it. It's not something that the city is set up to handle. We don't salt the roads. We don't have tons of snow plows. It's just basically when it snows more than an inch, the city shuts down. And, that gives us a little window into what happens when the supply chain breaks. What would happen if you start to become very aware of, are the stores open? Are the trucks delivering to the stores? Can the people who work at the stores get to the stores? You start to become very aware of what happens and it was very interesting to me today. I had to say in our discussion of men and tribalism and so forth that, when I went to the grocery store today, because it's still, people are being advised not to be on the roads at all. They're all frozen over. I have some chains on my truck, so it's not that bad, but it's men who are venturing out. Proportionally in the grocery store, there are probably 3/4 men and 25% women. And because I think, men are being sent out to brave the elements, and get the food. So the comfort of our society is, it's so dependent on this wealth and everything that we've been talking about. And so when that goes away, I think we do revert a little bit to a more primitive life ways.
Yeah. Or we just go mad. I think people are so geared towards, having everything of being able to tweet their life constantly, of having sugar whenever they want, of being able to, zonk out watching television or surfing the web or something. I think Americans and really people around the world, and not just white people, actually. I think this is you can see this horrible postmodern virus, or it's like the Borg from Star Trek. This has infected all cultures.
Very good analogy.
Yes.
Yeah. And we might just go insane if we were unplugged.
Well, there are a lot of people in the world, and we could probably use a few less. So, that's, people would go insane, turn, if the supermarket was closed, the Black Friday zombies would be breaking into it immediately. So, and they'd fight with each other and kill each other, and maybe that needs to happen.
Yeah, no, I must say that when I was writing my book, there were some moments where I was pondering, because obviously I wrote my book based on what I was doing myself. So clearly, I moved my family to the farm. I bought a farm and trying to learn to be self-sufficient, and at the same time, I'm still, of course, want to be connected in the world, and I still travel and so on. But I was wondering at some point and say, well, look, actually, there are some elements of morality in a way that I hate to say, but we deserve this. And by the way, let me be clear. When I say we, the people who have led us to this catastrophe, I don't consider myself part of them.
Oh, good.
Really
I was wondering about that.
Okay, I consider them my enemies.
Yeah.
They want us all slaves or dead. But still, we're supposed to be democracies. Of course, we're not really. But we were supposed to do something about it, and we didn't. So now we cannot save everybody. We have to save who we can. And indeed, in my book, I talk about the social bonds, and certainly to rebuild the clan, the tribe, with which you're going to survive. Because I do believe that one of the fundamental mistakes of the survivalist or prepper movement that has been around in the United States is to go it alone.
Yeah.
You cannot
Right.
survive alone. We are social beings that will need to survive in a group, because group means more protection, group means food production, and therefore an easier way to autonomy and therefore real freedom, which is an important part of what I write. Now, of course, it's very, very, very difficult in today's world because we all have jobs, we have the rent to pay. So I try to give some advice on how you can actually do it, just as I did. But I do realize it's not easy, it's not simple.
Yeah, no, I actually, one of the things that, well, first to bounce off that, I mean, one of the things that I think that you could do, I've tried to make moves in that direction myself, is that, you know, you need to find places where you can actually connect with people now.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I did recently was I'm like, well, why do I keep paying money to go to this 24-hour fitness where everybody puts on their headphones and you know, we're all basically, as we've been saying, zombies in our own little worlds, you know, basically you know, being alone in a crowd.
Yeah.
And you know, when I had access to this gym run by a friend of mine where it's really a community. And where everybody, when you walk in, everybody knows who you are, and you know, and so I'm like, well, I'm just going to quit my membership at 24-Hour Fitness and only belong to this gym. And so, you know, moving into a place where, you know, you are making more meaningful connections with people. So I think there are ways to do that. You know, we just have to kind of seek them out.
Yeah, you know, some of these things might eventually become the basis of tribes or clans. And as silly as it might say to say, oh, it's, you know, it's my gym, but you know, in a situation where the postmodern world really breaks down, it will be things like gyms and churches and small towns or something like that that will form the kind of sovereign basis of communities.
Exactly. I mean, they're the only people. I mean, I know for the Facebook message board of this gym, if someone, I've seen people say, "Hey, I need a job,"
Yeah.
and you know, 10 people jump in to respond, or you know, I've seen people say, "Hey, you know, I need help with something," and you know, people respond, but you don't have that in much of the modern world. So I mean, if you seek out those groups, because yes, I mean, the only places where we do have connections will be the places that we look.
Yeah. Yeah, without question. Well, maybe Piero, talk a little bit about this idea that of the sustainable autonomous base and what this would look like. What are ways that we can kind of escape the postmodern world before it sinks?
Yes, well, basically, of course, my strategy was to say, well, look, I need to move away from the big cities because when this thing is going to collapse, people are going to react at first with disbelief, but very quickly they will understand that you know, food doesn't grow in supermarkets. Therefore, they will start to be upset, angry, and they will start to smash everything, and therefore you have to be really away from the city. However, then I thought myself, well, I cannot write a book saying, okay, you need to buy a farm because not everyone can buy a farm. So I kind of thought of this concept of a sustainable autonomous base. So the idea is that wherever you are, whether it's your suburban flat, house, or if you live in the countryside, which is better, you have to consider yourself as a base. Base because you have to root yourself into some place where you can withstand the collapse. You cannot be a nomad. You cannot be wandering around. This is a romantic illusion because eventually you will starve.
Yeah.
Unless you are a lifetime trained hunter living in the Rocky Mountains or the Appalachians, and you know to live that kind of life for all your life. But you cannot say to an urban guy, okay, you need to move into the Appalachians or the Rocky Mountains just like that. It's not going to happen.
Right.
However, if you think of where you live as a base, where you are rooted, and that means that you are, of course, and I'll come to that, build the network around you. And you aim to be sustainable in the sense that sustainable and autonomous. So autonomous because if you are self-sufficient, you have the the means to live, and of course sustainable because it has to be long term, because we don't know how long a collapse can happen. Look at Argentina in the 90s. It took many years for the economy to eventually recover. I lived myself through the collapse of the Zimbabwe economy when I was living in that country. And I've seen not too far from where we live, I mean, Yugoslavia collapsing in the 90s as well, and the Soviet Union in 91 in a total collapse. And what saved the Russian people in Soviet Union was that everyone had his own garden. So in fact, they were sustainable and they were autonomous. And that saved millions of them from starvation in 91, 92. So this concept is based on, and I explain in detail, of course, how you build that. It's based on 7 fundamental elements, which are water, food, health, energy, knowledge, defense, and later is the social bond. And all these elements are, of course, intertwined and work in parallel together. But certainly the social bond, because this is really where it links to the concept of tribe, and it certainly has to begin immediately today. And you don't need to even wait to read my book, and you don't need to wait until you have your food in your house. You must learn to create the network, the links with the people around you. And you know what? It's hard. It's hard because this was so easy a generation or two ago, and yet today we have forgotten the skills of connecting genuinely with people. Not because you need something immediately, not because you want something, but because you may need something one day, and therefore you're ready to give time, you're ready to give a quality relation with people. And yes, most of the time you're going to be frustrated because people don't want to talk with you. You know, they want to keep their headphones on, and as you said very well, in the gym. And so you have to seek the people in local communities, in local tribes. And the world is full of little tribes, whether people who have tattoos, piercings. I mean, I'm taking that examples, but you have people who like to grow their urban gardens. You have people who are trying today in any situation, in any community, to create that. So just forget those who don't link, those who don't get it. That's okay. You will find others that do. And it's a long work, and certainly it's a long chapter in my book. But certainly we have to relearn to become humans again, to become part of a tribe, because we were never meant to be. We're not yet, or maybe we will evolve one day to be the postmodern human, but I don't believe so. We are still linked in our brains to the brutal reality of our nature.
Absolutely. You know, I actually did just finish that chapter in your book, Piero. And one of the things about the Survive book is that, you know, it does give a nice broad outline of all the things that you would need to have a society. Mm-hmm. But as we're talking about, you know, in this podcast, you know, for instance, if this collapse is slow, you know, like people who don't own property and so forth. I mean, you know, how many people are really just a few paychecks? You know, it's a cliche, but
exactly.
A few paychecks from having their apartment taken away.
Oh, sure.
You know, I mean,
even people who supposedly own property are just
well,
a few
exactly.
paychecks of having the
well, the government could seize it. I mean, my parents own their house outright, but their property taxes are amazing.
Oh yeah.
They're like a car payment themselves. Yeah. So you know, it's you know, how long would it be before the bank seizes your property or your landlord kicks you out? And you know, at the end of the day, I mean, if the network might be you know, as we're saying, the most important thing that you have, because if you have no support network, well, you can see what happens to people with no support network. They're on the street begging for change.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, people who have really no friends are the people lining up outside of homeless shelters.
Yeah, and let me let's end this conversation on a really interesting kind of speculative note that I was just thinking about throughout this, and you know, you were saying that it is even conceivable that we could evolve to exist in postmodern civilization. We would all be these balls of glob fat, and we'd be dumbed down, and we would have
What do they call them? Gray men?
Yeah.
What, like the aliens?
Right. We would have no desire outside, or we would have nothing that we desire outside of getting more sugar, and all language would be 140 characters, and all this kind of this horrible dystopia. But I was thinking about how we might change after the end of this postmodern world, and how we might change spiritually. And I was just thinking about this. Things like, if you look at contemporary Christianity in the United States, and that it's very different than it is in Europe. But you have things like the prosperity religion, or the kind of Joel Osteen stuff of, if you believe hard enough, then God is going to help you pay your mortgage and get a new job, and those who truly believe in Jesus are just a little more blessed, and they'll be richer. Essentially, it really is a prosperity religion. And this is just going to have to go. And so I guess either of you could pick up on this, but where do you think we will? Will we rediscover paganism? Will we in some ways re-enchant the world, or will we rediscover a kind of a harsher version of Christianity, or what are some of your speculations on this topic?
If I may, James Kunstler, who made me the privilege to write the foreword to my book, mm-hmm. he believes that we live in a total age of delusion, because no one wants to face the reality of what's going to happen, because it's so hard. Because anyone who has a brain and thinks a little bit understands that there's not going to be nuclear fusion helping us out. There's not going to be alternative energies to the scale of what we consume in terms of oil, gas, and coal. There's not going to be any Deus ex machina that is going to come down from the sky to save us. So yeah, we delude ourselves into believing into fairy tales, into in a religious thought, in the sense that we do not believe in reality. We believe in something that is unnatural or supernatural. And I say this with all the respect to people who believe into religions. I personally don't, but certainly people who are Muslim or Christian, mm-hmm. If you want to believe in reality, actually belief into something actually helps you to get a grip of that. However, when national policies or societies are clouded by this kind of reasoning that pray or hope is enough as a strategy, fucking doomed. Jewish people in the trains during the war going to Auschwitz, I'm sure they prayed a lot, but they still died. And I'm sure that the Russian soldiers in World War II who were sent without ammunition against German machine guns, I'm sure deep down they prayed, but they still died. Hope is not a strategy. Hope is a plus, but it's not a strategy. You need to have your there is a saying I used to be when I was certainly born Catholic, mm-hmm. and I remember that they were in the Catholic school I was in, they were telling us, help yourself and then maybe God will help you. So first we have to help ourselves. Now, is that going to help us to build a new society? Well, maybe. And I certainly believe that a new society will be more spiritual, because mm-hmm. we will be closer to nature, and nature is a cycle, and religions all come from the celebration of the cycles of nature. Mm-hmm. So we eventually will tend to that. Now, what are those religions, or what is this spiritual thought going to be? I don't know. I have mine. I have my philosophy. I like Nietzsche. I like Conan. I like this kind of philosophy. Yes. I believe that Jesus was a strong man, not a guy who turned the other cheek. I mean, he threw the merchants of the temple away. Mm-hmm. Muhammad, for Muslims, he was a fighter. He was a warrior. I mean, religions originally started strong, and eventually in the postmodern world, they have been turned into some sissy weak things. uh, we are going to have toughness again, and
Right.
this is a good thing, I believe.
Well, and if I can jump in here,
Yeah,
my
please.
take on what would happen with religions is that, it was very interesting. I saw an article about a gang in Mexico, and they they were calling themselves the Knights Templars gang. And
Another one.
I thought that was very strange at first, and then I thought, well, I mean, they're Catholic and probably half Spanish, so maybe it's not so far fetched. But at the same time, I think religions and hero cults and things like that, they can be very, they're syncretic. The way they start, they start with just an idea. I mean, maybe for a small gang of men, hey, I saw a movie with Antonio Banderas, and they were the Knight Templars, and those guys were awesome. Let's call ourselves the Knights Templars. It might be as simple as that. I mean, men, they can attach themselves to it. Just a simple idea, and maybe that's enough. I mean, I look at it, a lot of, say, the pagan guys that I associate with. It's not necessarily about this literal belief in pagan gods, but they see, hear these stories that reflect the kind of ideas that the kind of virtues that they want to embody.
Yeah.
And so, you may latch on to this symbol or that symbol or whatever, this story or that story. And I think that's how religions actually start.
I agree.
Yeah, the philosophers and propagandists come later, and
Yes.
they create these big rational systems. But that happens like 500 years after.
Right.
Because if you go down to the root of, and I certainly studied the fall of the Roman Empire, but certainly across the world, you have a stronger tribe that takes over a weaker tribe. And eventually, after very quickly, people say, well, why are you so strong? And the guy says, well, I'm strong because I have a lot of men and I have a lot of strengths. But eventually, you want to make this longer lasting because you're getting old. So eventually, you say, well, I'm strong because supernatural beings, call them gods, call him God, whatever, protects me. So you may even win against other tribes without having to fight. Look at the Jewish religion. Some people criticize Jewish communities, but they are the ultimate survival tribe. I mean, these guys have been, for whatever reason, hunted, persecuted, kicked out of their land, came back, and they're still around and doing pretty well, I must say, today.
They know how to take care of us and not worry about them.
Yeah.
They take care of their own, and that's why.
Well, right. It's amazing. I don't know of any other people that is still around. I mean, and that you can trace back to the medieval or ancient world in the sense of, I might be related to a Visigoth, but there's no Visigoth community. But
you need to start one.
And yet, what's interesting is that 2,500 years ago, when it actually started, it was just one out of thousands of religions in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And they just had this, I mean, on a historical point of view, I'm not going to judge of course, on the spiritual point of view, but on the historical point of view, they just had the stroke of luck. The army of Persia, who was besieging the town, they prayed for God to help them, and they got the plague. What a coincidence. So, of course, if you're a believer, you say, well, that's God. If you're a historian, you say, well, that's a coincidence. And that coincidence made them believe that even if they eventually lost that war and were exiled to Babylon, their God was strong. And one thing about a pagan compared to monotheism that I found striking, and it's something that we probably will rediscover, is that pagans in the ancient world didn't have to believe because they could see the gods. When there was thunderstorm and the lightning was striking, that was Zeus. And there was no question. You could see it. You could see the gods. When there was a storm in the sea, that was Poseidon.
Yeah.
Now, monotheist, you need to have a leap of faith. And of course, you need to have the gun or the sword to force you to believe. But certainly you need the leap of faith because you cannot see God.
Yeah.
God is everywhere, but God is nowhere. And it's a very, very different philosophical opinion, unless you really believe that God is helping your tribe, your race, however you call it. And certainly the Jewish tribe, if you call it like that, and we know genetically it's not, it's a bit more complicated, but certainly it is an example for a lot of us to understand how you build and how you set up future societies. And at least we have to study that for sure.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. I think also in the ancient world, gods were visible in the sense that you would become one or be touched by one in the sense of, when you're madly in love, irrationally in love, you're kind of touched by Aphrodite, or you become a
Right.
god in that sense, or if you're mad at war, you kind of take on the spirit of Ares. I think there was or Mars. I think there was a real direct connection with the divine, that we've lost, in the postmodern world, and maybe the postmodern world is kind of more deeply Christian than some people think. Anyway, these are. I think we should do this again because I think actually we're now into an hour, and I think we've just opened up some really interesting lines of thought that we want to pick up later. But so let's just put a bookmark in this discussion. But I really enjoyed it, and before we go, I think I'll mention that both Piero and Jack have books you should go purchase. They're both of which are well worth reading. There's a recently published "Survive the Economic Collapse," which of course is published by Washington Summit Publishers and Radix, so of course I'm heavily biased in promoting it, but nevertheless I think you should go get it. And then Jack's most recent book from 2012 is the Way of Men. But do either of you gentlemen have anything else that you'd like to tell our audience?
Well, I can't wait for Jack's book to be translated in French.
That's cool.
My French editor loves the book, and I believe you guys reached an agreement. So I can't wait to have it around, and because I think it's a book that is going to shake France into becoming men again.
Yes. Yeah. No, I'm excited about that. Yeah. I always love to see my work translated, and that's been happening more and more.
It's funny. Europeans are becoming interested in us. I'll just mention this. I just was recently contacted by Italian press who wants to translate all the stuff we've been doing, Washington Summit Publishers and Radix. And it's kind of funny because one of the reasons why I started Alternative Right and all this stuff 4 or 5 years ago now is that I wanted to learn from Europe in the sense of I thought that in America we didn't have any translations of the French New Right, of Benoit and Fay and so on and so forth, and we needed to kind of Europeanize our movement. And I think in some ways maybe the arrow is pointing the other direction now. I think sometimes a lot of Europeans are becoming interested in stuff we're doing. So that is quite good. But anyway, let's just put a bookmark in it. And I certainly enjoyed this discussion, and I think we should do it again because I think we just in a way just got warmed up.
Excellent.
But Jack and Piero, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.